I want to welcome everyone to this service, and we'll have some other people joining us. My name is Sherry Thomas, and for those of you who have just joined us, the best way to view this service is, like Barbara mentioned, is to click on the view at the top right of your screen and then select the speaker view so that you'll be able to see the person who's speaking as opposed to just a big screen of all different people. And our host has muted you, while we're doing the service, but we're going to unmute at the end of the service so we can have like kind of a virtual gathering online to share our comments and thoughts on the service. Well, welcome to this worship service created by the members of the UU Mental Health Network Speakers Bureau. And as I mentioned, after the service, we will have a chance to share our reflections over Zoom. And I'm going to get started with the chalice lighting. We light our flaming chalice as a beloved people united in love and thirsting for restorative justice. May it melt away the tethers that uphold whiteness in our midst. May it spark in us a spirit of humility. May it ignite in us radical love that transforms our energy into purposeful action. This is a chalice of audacious hope. This chalice shines a light on our shared past, signaling our intention to listen deeply, reflect wisely, and move boldly toward our highest ideals. I'm going to turn this. You can see, oops. See, there's the chalice. Sorry about that. There it is. Well, the chalice. All right, I invite you to listen to our story for all ages entitled The King's Highway. Once a king had a great highway built for the members of his kingdom. After it was completed, but before it was open to the public, the king decided to have a contest. He invited as many as desired to participate. Their challenge was to see who could travel the highway best. On the day of the contest, the people came. Some of them had fine chariots. Some had fine clothing, fine hairdos, or great food. Some young men came in their track clothes and ran along the highway. People traveled the highway all day, but each one, when he arrived at the end, complained to the king that there was a large pile of rocks and debris left on the road at one spot, and this got in the way of their travel and hindered it. At the end of the day, a lone traveler crossed the finish line wearily and walked over to the king. He was tired and dirty, but he addressed the king with great respect and handed him a bag of gold. He explained, "I stopped along the way to clear a pile of rocks and debris that was blocking the road. This bag of gold was under it all. I want you to return it to its rightful owner." The king replied, "You are the rightful owner." The traveler replied, "Oh no, this is not mine. I've never known such money." "Oh yes," said the king, "you've earned this gold, for you won my contest. He who travels the road best is he who makes the road smoother for those who will follow."
My name is Carol McGough from the UU congregation in Montclair, New Jersey, and I'm happy to present our first reading, which is an excerpt from Barbara's book, Held. Dr. Mark Reagans is a staff psychiatrist at The Village, an integrated service agency in Long Beach, California, that is renowned for its success in treating difficult psychiatric cases, often involving homelessness, schizophrenia, and substance abuse. He says, "When I ask psychiatric patients who have done well what I did that was helpful to them, they almost always recount some moment of human connectedness. It was when you hugged me and I could tell you knew how much it pained me to have my child taken away. It was when you believed in me when I couldn't believe in myself. It was when you lent me $5, even though you're not supposed to. It was when you drove me home from the hospital in your car, even though it was smelly. It was when I knew you really cared and wouldn't give up on me. In other words, it was when they were the recipient of an act of human kindness or when someone believed in them. These moments are what help in healing. Here is where the faith community comes in. People of faith are experts in human kindness. We can believe in people. We can see something inside them that they aren't able to see themselves. We can give acceptance and love, even when an illness is untreated or a person feels hopeless. And these may be central factors in recovery. And now we turn to a space of gratitude and giving. And on this Memorial Day weekend, we hold profound gratitude for those who gave the ultimate sacrifice, who lost their lives in defense of our country. And indeed, we also hold profound sadness for the up to 20 veterans who take their lives by suicide every day in this country. And for the 80% of people who die by suicide who give some sign of their intentions, whether a verbal sign or a behavioral sign. We have a great deal to accomplish in this country. And our recipient today, the UU Mental Health Network, has a single goal in that regard, and I shall read it from our bylaws. Our single goal is to empower the beloved community in honoring each individual's unique mental health journey toward wellness. And to accomplish that single goal, we have focused on 4 different areas. One is support, one is education, one is social justice, and one is worship. And we welcome you to our first worship service today. We hope, we request that you will give as generously as possible, and any donation that you give will be greatly received and graciously received. When we are finished with the service, I will put the entire link to the website for uumentalhealth.org in the chat. And when you go to the website, you will see that you're able to donate not 1, not 2, but 3 different ways. You may send us a check, you may donate through PayPal, or you may donate through your credit card. So please give generously. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carol. Our opening hymn will be Every Night and Every Morn, and it will be sung by Marcus Bry Hawk.
Every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. should be so. We were made for joy and woe, and when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go.
We'll now have a reading by the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison Reed.
Nate was maybe in his 30s. On Sunday mornings at the worship service, he would sit right in the front row. And he sat there, he'd rub his legs, he'd rock back and forth. He was a bit awkward, his voice loud, and from time to time he would disappear. One weekday, Donna, my wife and co-minister, and I were at a bridge party with the senior members of the congregation. They were mostly in their 80s, and we gathered in a nice suburban apartment. There were plenty of appetizers, serious card playing, and some light conversation until the hostess said, "I don't know how you put up with that young man fidgeting around throughout the service. It's just terrible." What happened next left me stunned. One octogenarian said, "You do know it's his medication that makes him do that." A retired public health nurse told us she had spoken to him and knew what was bothering him. A former university professor said, "I was once institutionalized." And someone else said, "My son has bouts like that." Neither Donna nor I said one word. And what was amazement turned into pride. I knew why Nate kept coming to church. It was not about the sermons, whether scholarly or entertaining. It was not about universalism, our professed belief in a loving God. It was our lived theology, God made manifest in the love that surrounded him.
Thank you to our presenters today. The music was, I believe, written just for this service, and thank you for that lovely reading. Our sermon today will be presented by the founder of the UU Mental Health Network, Reverend Barbara F. Myers. Reverend Myers is a Unitarian Universalist community minister with a mental health ministry based in Fremont, California. She is a peer support specialist and assistant director of the Life Reaching Across to Life Peer Support Center, and she's the author of a mental health curriculum for congregations and the book Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health, published by Skinner House in 2020. She is the president of the board of the UU Mental Health Network. It's my pleasure to introduce our wonderful speaker today, Reverend Barbara F. Myers.
Hello, thank you for that, Sherry, that introduction. So I'm going to start my, let's see, I guess, share screen. There's my PowerPoint. All right. So I'll start with a story. This is something that happened in my own congregation. There was a woman and a man, a husband and wife, who had a daughter who had very serious mental health problems and had been hospitalized many times for her psychiatric problems. And they had been rushing back and forth to the hospital to make sure to visit her every evening. And there was one evening they got a phone call from someone in the church, and the person said, oh, there's somebody in our church who's been hospitalized, and we'd like to know if you'd like to bring over a casserole over to their family's house so that they don't have to make food for themselves. And so they wanted to help, and they prepared some food, and they rushed over to this other person's house and gave the food. And then they went off to visit their daughter at the hospital. And on the way home, the woman said, wait a minute, we have somebody that's in the hospital in our family, and nobody's bringing us casseroles. Is there a double standard here? And I'll tell you the answer to that. And the answer is yes, there is a double standard. Many times when people have someone who is in a psychiatric ward, or somebody that's recovering from an addiction, people maybe they don't even tell others that they have somebody that's having that situation, but the church doesn't run out and give casseroles to people. At least many churches don't do that. And some of it can be because they haven't told anyone from the church, or maybe it's because they think that people would rather not be recognized that way. But what I want to tell you is that the message of this service is that this no casserole disease needs to stop. We need to recognize that families have mental health problems, need casseroles just like anybody else in the congregation. So I'll talk a little bit about mental health and how it shows up in our congregations. Prevalence is 1 out of every 5 Americans each year. That's that was before COVID. Now I've heard that it's more like 1 in 3, which is, gotten a lot worse since the pandemic. Nearly half of these people coexist with an addiction. And as I said, it's worse since the pandemic. So any Sunday morning, the pews or your Zoom screens, or however you're being broadcasting your sermon, they're filled with people who are living with mental health problems and their loved ones. And many of them are sitting there suffering silently. So I have some definitions from the American Psychiatric Association of mental health and mental disorder. Mental health is described as a successful performance of mental function resulting in productive activities, fulfilling relationships with other people, and the ability to adapt to change and cope with adversity. So it's productive activities, relationships, and being able to cope with change. Mental disorder, as defined by the American Psychiatric Association, is a behavioral syndrome creating impairment or distress in thinking, mood, or behavior that has been diagnosed by a mental health professional. So another major thing that I want to impart is that mental health and mental disorder are on a continuum. It isn't like everyone's already healthier, everyone's already having mental health problems. We live our lives on that continuum every day, and realize that everyone is somewhere on that continuum at some point in time. So what does it mean to recover from mental health? This is a working definition from the SAMHSA, Substance Abuse and Mental Health Association from the US government. So mental health recovery is a process of change in which people improve their mental health and wellness. They live a self-directed life, and they strive to live to their full potential. It's not necessarily the absence of symptoms or the absence of the need for medications. So some people still have symptoms, but then they can still live their lives in a self-directed way to the potential that they want to have. So I'll tell a little bit about my story, not because it's so incredibly important, but because I know that it helps people to understand that they can see that that somebody else has had that story, and it makes it safe for them to think about what they might be living with. So that is a picture of me that you see there with my 10-day-old daughter, Carol. And shortly after that picture was taken, I became very ill with postpartum depression. I was suicidal, and I was hospitalized in the psychiatric ward of our local hospital. It was a deeply troubling experience for me, and I felt like I was a damaged human being, and that I was very sad that anything like that had happened to me, and I didn't want other people to know about it. I went along this way. I was able to. I was one of the people that was lucky enough to have a medication that worked. The first thing they tried worked for me. I got out of the hospital and re-engaged in my life, but I was a very unhappy person that I had that, and I didn't want anyone else to know about it. Literally 8 years later, I know because it was when my daughter was 8 years old, I finally told myself that I did not want to live my life like that anymore. I didn't want to be so desperately unhappy. And so I had a re-examination of my life. I went to my psychiatrist and told him I was willing to do anything that I needed to do in order to not be so desperately unhappy all the time. And so I started seeing him very regularly, and I realized, not at the time I didn't realize it, but I now know that I was very fortunate to have a psychiatrist who had an active spiritual life himself, and which he thought that was a very important part of his life. So one of the things he asked me was, what are you doing for yourself spiritually? And I said, nothing, because I hadn't gone to church since I went to college. That was, over maybe 15 years before that. So he said, well, would you like to try to meditate? And when he said that, the first thing that went into my mind was, what? You've got to be kidding me. How can I sit around and do nothing? How is that going to save, how is that going to help anything? I wanted something I wanted to do. That's what I did all the time, just doing one thing after the other. But I had promised myself that I would do anything he said, because I was so determined to make a change. So he gave me a little book about meditation. I went home and I read it, and I did sit quietly for 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day, sometimes maybe 15. And the next time I went to see my psychiatrist, I told him, I don't know where it came from, but I'm happy. And I'll never forget what he said to me. He said, it pointed at me and he said, it came from you. That was like a total awakening. I realized, as soon as he said that, I realized he's right. Happiness wasn't going to be something that I was going to get from any accomplishments or what anybody else was going to give me. Happiness was something that came from within. And my slowing down for even 5 to 10 minutes a day was enough to be able to get in touch with that, what I now consider a spiritual center. And I now consider this whole experience as being, I consider it the word rebirth not to be inappropriate. I sort of changed the way of thinking about the world, and and found a different purpose in my life. I had been working as a software engineer at IBM, and I loved that job. They were great, wonderful place to work for. Very interesting, challenging work. But my life had moved in another direction, and I started going to church. I went to a UU church because some of the things that I read sounded like it were things that I viewed as important, and that never disappointed me. Then after I'd been going to that church for a couple of years, I went to I worked with several other people to start a congregation in our hometown, which is Fremont, California. And so I eventually, after, running a depression support group at my church, I decided that I would try taking a pastoral care class to see if that would help me. And when that was at Star King's School for the Ministry, which is local to me here. And about halfway through that class, I thought, this is what I want to do with my life. So I changed my career. I retired from IBM, and I went to seminary for 4 years, and then became a community minister affiliated with our home congregation here in Fremont. So it's quite a turnaround in my life. So I want to talk a little bit about mental health, some of the concepts that I think are important in mental health ministry. One is that mental health isn't just something one gets out of a pill. For those who even respond to a pill, that's not just something one get out of a pill. There are many different dimensions. This is a Samson illustration of what is involved in wellness. There's a spiritual side, which is, what I view as being connected with myself and what I think is important in the world. There's an intellectual side, which is learning new things, open to new ideas. There's a physical side, keeping yourself healthy, eating well, getting enough sleep, getting exercise. There's an environmental side, being outside in nature at some point and having a safe place to live. There's a financial side, having enough resources to be able to live the way that you need to live. There's an occupational side. Are you doing something with your life that you think is important? And it doesn't mean it has to be paid. It can be volunteer work, can be an occupational thing. There's a social side. It's so important to have friends and other people that you can relate to. All of those things are important in wellness. And I know sometimes when I'm working with someone in our mental health center, I try to visualize this picture and think, what's missing? What is it what of these dimensions are there? And then see if there's something that we can work with the person to help out on what's missing. People in congregations can help in the areas that aren't covered by professional services. Certainly the spiritual side, the social side, being with individuals, helping people if they need help in finding financial or occupational resources. A lot of things in congregation can help. So there's spiritual implications. Mental health crisis is a spiritual problem as well as a psychiatric one. It's certainly true for me. People may experience existential doubts about their selfhood. What is truth? What is meaningful? What is love? What is agency? What are they allowed to do themselves? And it may undermine their faith in the divine or their belief in justice. So spiritual practice is helpful to many with mental health problems. In a fairly recent study, there was done talking to folks that had mental health difficulties and their family members, asked them what is it that helped them the most, and spiritual practice was the #1 coping skill. You know, even though this hasn't until recent years been recognized by the professional mental health health caregivers, it turns out that it's used by people anyway. So examples of things that people often mention are meditation, prayer, music, spiritual direction. That means working with somebody who's going to be a companion with you on your spiritual journey. Practices such as Tai Chi, Qigong, yoga, and chanting. There are a myriad of other things that aren't on this list as well, things that help get you in touch with what is ultimate and important in your life. So some of the things that people talk about that are important is one-on-one support. Hope is the first step in recovery. We may need to hold hope for someone if they don't see it at that time. So I'll give you a story about when I was hospitalized in the psychiatric ward. I was totally hopeless. I thought my life is just at an end. I just wanted to die. My doctor said he could help me. And I thought, he just tells that to everybody. And my family said that they were hopeful for my return. And I thought, I'm just a burden to them. And then another patient came in to my room there. I think it was, maybe second or third day I was there, and sat down, and she told me how she had come into the hospital a couple of weeks before, and she was very, very ill, and that she had been given treatment by her doctor, and good meals there and everything, all the various groups that they had there, and that she was feeling so much better now, and she was going to be coming home soon. And she told me that she knew that I could get better too, because she had gotten better. And when she told me that, I thought, maybe there's hope for me. That was really the start of my recovery. Right there is when she told me that. So that's why I'm a big believer in peer support, because I could hear that from a peer, from somebody who was there, when I couldn't hear it from my family or from my doctor. So I always try to encourage people to try to find peer support. Okay, another important thing is presence. Presence means being with a person, actively listening without judgment, validating their feelings, and not giving advice. So it's being there and just letting them know that you are there with them and not giving them any advice. Even if you don't agree with what they're saying, just listen. Presence is a sacred gift. I tell you a story from when this was made so incredibly real to me. When I was an intern minister, this is in my 4th year of the seminary, I was an intern at a church in San Francisco. It was a fairly large church, and I had started maybe a month before. I knew some of the people, but not all of them. It was one Sunday morning. Everybody was bustling around, getting ready for the service, and there's one woman who I had previously met and who I knew had some really severe anxiety problems, came up to me just frantic, saying, Barbara, I'm frantic. I don't know what to do. I'm so anxious. Please help me. Please do something. And I thought, oh my gosh, what can I possibly do? But I suggested that she and I go off and sit in this in the library. There was nobody in the library at that time, and she went into the library with me and closed the door, and I sat there and I held her hand, and I was thinking, what can I tell her? What can I tell her to do? I can't think of anything. I'm going to be a failure as a minister if I can't think of anything in this kind of situation. And no words being said by either of us. And we just sat there. And after a minute or two, she turned to me and she said, I feel so much better just being here with you. What a lesson for me. What a lesson for me. It wasn't anything I was going to say or do or refer her to or anything like that. It was my presence, which is what helped her level of anxiety go down to a much more reasonable level. And I have learned that lesson a number of times in my ministry. And I'll just want to leave that with you, that just being with someone and being helpful to them, being present with them is a sacred gift that you can give to them. So another thing that I have learned in my ministry is the value of public witness. So almost every time that I have given a service about mental health, I tell a little bit about my own story, not because I think it's so great, but because I know that it makes it safe for people who are listening to acknowledge it within themselves and their families. And at the end of the sermon, at the end of the service, what I do is ask for an active public witness for those who are present either by Zoom or by in person, to rise in body or spirit if they or a loved one has lived with a mental health problem. And every time I've done this, it's somewhere between 80 and 100% of the people will rise. And for those that are on Zoom, I have them type in yes, yes, yes on Zoom if they have, and no, no, no if they have not. And just see a whole bunch of yeses coming by, very few no's. And people look around and they think, oh my gosh, I had no idea there were so many people. Did you see how, oh my gosh, and then at coffee hour, they talk about it. I talk to my sister or my brother, or I have depression at one time or whatever. And it's suddenly the stigma is being cracked a little bit. And that's the most effective stigma buster I have found. So a public witness. So if you're planning a service at your congregation, having somebody tell their story, somebody who is respected by the congregation to tell their story, and then at the end of the service, asking for a public witness of folks that have also experienced mental health in their lives or their family. That will that's the most effective thing that I could suggestion I could give to you. So what is it that people can do that helps them? And professional or peer help, or both. Caring for your body, getting enough sleep, getting enough exercise, getting good food to eat, nourishing food, helping to manage your stress, learn what kinds of things help you when you're stressed out, being aware of your emotions, enriching your life in some way, learning new things, engaging in artistic activities. For me, it was, I became a weaver, and I'm woven a number of things now as part of my spiritual life. And engage with your spirituality. All of those things help an individual. What helps a family or loved ones? I have the image there is for the National Alliance on Mental Illness. Many families have found that to be helpful because they have a family-to-family education program. Also, getting some sort of professional or peer help is also helpful for family members. Learning how to communicate with their loved ones effectively. Helping your loved one live with their situation, and having a life of your own. Mental health is also a social justice issues, and there are a number of factors that make it difficult to get at good mental health care. First, there are insurance and money issues. Coverage is often non-existent or inadequate for anybody, and many practitioners don't take it and expect you to pay out of pocket. There's a lack of wide availability for mental health treatment, and it's hard to find a practitioner accepting new patients now. That's just the way things are now. It's really difficult. And sometimes alternative therapies are too costly or not widely available for many. So working on those social justice issues can be something that you can do with as part of a congregation or as part of another group that's helping out. So I wanted to tell you about the book. If you didn't know that I had authored this book. It's called Held, Showing Up for Each Other's Mental Health. It was published by Skinner House Books, which is a UU publisher. And it was in 2020. There is a study guide included. And a number of congregations have used this as a way to start the education of their congregation on mental health issues. So that is what the end.
Well, thank you, Barbara, for that powerful sharing your just inspiring story and your powerful message and your book. Our hope is that, some members of congregations and others will find it a useful way to begin their discussion of mental health within their congregation. And also, I do want to mention that this service is being recorded and will be available for later viewing. We'll get you the details on that. We have the UU Mental Health, our website. And so if you know someone that is impacted by mental health, which is basically all of us, let them know that if they missed today's service, they can see it. Our last hymn today is entitled When I Am Frightened, also by our guest composer, conductor Marcus Gray Hawk.
Okay.
When I am frightened, will you reassure me? When I'm uncertain, will you hold my hand? Will you share some of your stories with me? If you will show me compassion, then I may learn to care as you do. Then I may learn to care. When I am angry, will you still embrace me? When I am thoughtless, will you understand? Will you believe in me, stand by me willingly? Will you share some of your questions with me? If you will show me acceptance, then I may learn to give as you do. Then I may learn to give. When I am troubled, will you listen to me? When I am lonely, will you be my friend? Will you be there for me, comfort me tenderly? Will you share some of your feelings with me? If you will show me commitment, then I may learn to love as you do. Then I may learn to love.
As we extinguish this flame, let us not see it as entering into darkness, but entering into the space for rest and reflection. Let it inspire us for future healing. Carol's here.
Thank you, Sherry. The words of the benediction come from Roddy Bell Shelton Biggs, a seminarian at Meadville Lombard Theological School. Friends, thank you for your witness to all that exists on the margins. Thank you for your service and commitment to hold yourselves and one another in great and steadfast love. Moving forward from this space, may we continue to nurture spiritual growth, and may we continue to travel along the winding pathway to healing from whatever brokenness we individually and collectively hold, knowing that we do not journey this path alone. Amen.